I'm Selena Wang in Washington, and we begin with some breaking news. The judge of the Daniel Penny's fatal subway chokehold trial in New York City has been dismissed. The top charge has been dismissed of second-degree manslaughter at the request of prosecutors. All of this after jurors reported that they were deadlocked on the second-degree manslaughter charge. They sent a second note repeating that they cannot come to a unanimous conclusion on the count. Penny is also charged with negligent homicide in the death of street performer Jordan Neely. Police say the former Marine put Neely in a 6-minute-long chokehold after Neely boarded a subway car and acted erratically and screamed at passengers. Joining me now is ABC News legal contributor and trial attorney Brian Buckmeyer. So, Brian, what's your initial take on all of this, and just how surprising is this?
I'm shocked. This is very surprising. Whether you're talking about the dismissal of the top charge from the prosecutor, that's a very rare move and a very big move, because if the prosecutor had not moved to dismiss that charge and it stayed as a hung jury, they would have the opportunity to retry that case later. Dismissing it now means it's gone forever. So it's a very big move by the prosecutor. And then the judge even himself saying, I'm not really sure if this is appropriate or I have the power to do so, but bringing them back for another week, because we're now going to come back on Monday to deliberate on this. There are so many appellate issues and so many even just trial issues that I think Daniel Penny is really doing well for himself, where maybe a day ago he's a little bit more worried.
So, Brian, you called this extremely surprising. Why do you think this decision was made then?
So, in my opinion, I think that this is, by the jury, a compromise verdict. And the judge themselves said they did not want that. And what I mean by that is it's peculiar to look at a case like this with the facts that you have and say that you are hung on the idea of Daniel Penny being reckless, but you are still considering him being negligent. If you're making a distinction between the two, that means you, to some degree, don't believe it's self-defense. Because if you believed it was self-defense, it would negate both of those charges. So the question becomes, why do you think he was not reckless, but think that he's potentially negligent? It doesn't legally make sense. The only thing that makes sense is they're trying to kind of, for lack of a better term, split the baby and compromise.
Okay, so the top charge is dismissed. What do you think this means in terms of deliberations and the lesser charge we're talking about?
So again, coming from a standpoint where I truly think that this is a compromise within the jury, I think come back Monday, these juries are going to have a conversation of, okay, we read the instructions and it told us not to go to criminal negligent homicide if we couldn't decide on manslaughter. Now that's gone, let's focus on this. And I think there might be a conversation of compromise, that we couldn't come to this conclusion, so let's look at criminal negligent homicide. And I think there could be a verdict there. But that's a much lesser case. That's an E felony, punishable by up to 4 years in prison. But Daniel Penny could get probation.
Now, this is a case that has gained national attention. It's been especially polarizing for residents of New York City. Can you just talk a bit about the kinds of questions that you think these jurors are wrestling with and what's been causing this deadlock?
I think even bigger than the case itself is just the idea of self-defense. I mean, I was a practicing public defender in Brooklyn for about 8.5 years, and I think the idea of self-defense, especially when someone dies, is a very heavy one, because we all, I think, internally believe that killing someone else is a bad thing to do. But then the law allows for a legal excuse under very serious circumstances. And so trying to draw that line as to when that's allowed is big. And then put on top of that the New York City subway system, where people with mental health and substance abuse can see everyday people who are not suffering from those episodes at that point in time. And the danger that can sometimes exist, people are asking questions of, should I step in and help? Should I look away? What happens if I do step in and help and I go too far? What could happen to me? And I think wrestling with all those questions and there's the general idea of this case is very big for not only the city, but the country.
Yeah, Brian, major questions there. And I want to bring into our conversation ABC News senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katursky, who is live for us outside of the courthouse. Aaron, give us an update. What is going on from the court?
Well, the judge has agreed with the prosecutors to dismiss the manslaughter charge that Daniel Penny had been facing. That was the most serious count, facing up to 15 years in prison. That manslaughter charge has now been dismissed after the jury signaled it could not reach a unanimous verdict. The judge instructed the jury to go home for the weekend, come back on Monday, and resume deliberating on a lesser charge of negligent homicide. This exposes Daniel Penny to maybe 4 or 5 years in prison at the most over the death of Jordan Neely. And the standard for conviction isn't, well, the standard's the same beyond a reasonable doubt, but clearly the elements of the charge are slightly different. The jury still must decide whether Daniel Penny was justified in using the force that he did. This is a politically charged, emotional case. The jury was unable to reach the verdict, but the prosecutors were adamant that they had to follow through with both counts. So they will return here on Monday and deliberate the charge of negligent homicide.
And Aaron, what is the prosecution saying right now?
Say that one more time.
What is the prosecution saying?
Well, the prosecutors wanted to make sure that the jury continued with its deliberations and was willing to dismiss the manslaughter charge so that it could, I would imagine, try Penny again if he were to be acquitted, if there was a hung jury on both counts. You can only bring a case again if there's a hung jury on all the charges in the indictment. So if the judge had declared a mistrial now, leaving open the question of negligent homicide, that the prosecutors would not have been able to revisit the case should that become necessary. So this preserves an option for prosecutors if the jury comes back hung on the negligent homicide count.
Aaron, thank you for joining us live from the courthouse. And Brian, one more question to you. You heard Aaron there. He talked about this being an emotionally charged case. Can you talk about the implications of the ultimate decision that's made here? And could it affect people's behavior? You talked about such big questions that people wrestle with in this case in terms of, you know, hero or villain when it comes to Daniel Penny. Are people going to want to intervene when they see something like this?
So, and again, this is just from my background of being a public defender and a defense attorney in the city for about a decade now, and maybe I'm a little bit jaded. But I think that we're going to talk about this for a few more weeks or months, and people will kind of have that thought. But from what I've seen of the city, there are reasons why there are first responders, people who join the military, people who are officers and paramedics. There are innately people who are going to run to danger and run to difficult situations to help people. And I think that's going to innately happen all the time. I don't think they're going to stop and think, oh, what about Daniel Penny? So I think it's still going to occur, but I think there's going to be a conversation of when those people do jump in to try to help and maybe go too far or something wrong or unexpected happens, what are we as a society going to do? And I think that conversation will continue to happen to make sure that wherever this goes, we're in the right place.